Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Here in the house, we are going to be looking to explore and re-examine some of the lesser-known gems from the horror genre, films, books, and TV shows that horror audiences may have overlooked or forgotten all about. I am your host, Justin Steele. Today in the Dog's House, we are going to be looking at the 1993 thriller Mother's Boys, directed by Yves Simoneau, based on the novel by Bernard Taylor and starring Jamie Lee Curtis. By the late 80s, even though we still love them, slashers were beginning to oversaturate the horror genre. There were still the fun, scary elements, but iconic villains such as Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger were starting to lose some of their scary appeal due to their celebrity-like status. Hollywood was turning to stylish, sexy, psychological thrillers in order to justify still making horror flicks. Basically horror films, but on a higher brow level. However, by 1993, like slashers in the 80s, these psycho-sexy lady scenario was running its course. I would argue that this specific trend began in 1987 with Fatal Attraction, starring Michael Douglas and Glenn Close. These features centered on the deconstruction of the nuclear family. Typically, another woman would come into the picture and disrupt the life of the family. In Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Rebecca De Mornay is the nanny out for revenge. In Fatal Attraction, Michael Douglas has an affair and Glenn Close is the other woman. And this theme carried on through the 90s into Single White Female, where it was the roommate of an engaged woman, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh and Bridget Fonda, respectively, and the roommate became the dangerous stalker. Mother's Boys marked the end of these specific psychological thrillers. Jamie Lee Curtis plays Jude Madigan. She is a wife and mother that abandoned her family, and now the husband, played by Peter Gallagher, is getting remarried and she decides that she wants back in, at any cost. Where Fatal Attraction began the trend with the other woman having to ultimately go up against the wife, Mother's Boys brings everything full circle and now it is the wife that is the other woman. As a feminist, I am torn with this simplification of the roles of women with almost every other one of these evil women psychological thrillers, except for Mother's Boys. The main reason being that the suggestion is that the woman trying to achieve in one way or another the stereotypical traditional family values is the good woman, while the other woman who is single, has a career, she is always designated into the evil woman role. What I like about Mother's Boys is that it is the technical wife that is actually the problem. She is, not the other woman, the career woman, Callie, played by Joanne Whalley, is the heroine of the film. She is a woman of power as a school principal, and she also wants to care for the husband and the kids. She doesn't want to usurp anyone's place. She just wants to be another person that these kids and this guy can count on. I did a little research before starting this episode, and I find that most of the very, very few reviews out there about Mother's Boys are primarily negative. And what this negativity centers on is the lack of a body count and gore, etc. And if you are looking for the standard horror movie body count, then no, Mother's Boys is not for you. Remember, this is the early 90s when horror was something that mainstream audiences were semi-ashamed of. That doesn't mean that there is still not plenty to enjoy in this feature, but you should definitely watch it in the right frame of mind. And there are plenty of horror films that came out in the early 90s that I love. People Under the Stairs, Candyman, Silence of the Lambs, which is technically, they kind of marketed it as more of a psychological thriller. But it was a time when audiences thought horror was something to kind of look down on. Until Scream came about and we had the resurgence of slasher films that were that sort of hip, scary, self-aware. And there's a debate about whether or not psychological thrillers belong to a separate category or if they're really any different than horror and just have a different name. I remember doing a top 10 list a while back about non-horror films that, mainstream audiences could get into that might not be considered horror, and somebody became upset that I included Joyride on that list. And I did do my homework, however, and the filmmakers, when on the audio commentary, discuss how they very intentionally did not make Joyride as a horror film. They were very much trying to make specifically a thriller. And that means to them, focusing on suspense, having very little gore, but most people do consider Joyride a horror film. And personally, I'm all about putting horror films into subcategories for like personal silly reasons, such as, oh, I want to watch a Killer Doll movie tonight, or I want some iconic Freddy Krueger or Leatherface or whatever. However, I find it problematic when Hollywood does it just for the sake of marketing. I think for quite a while now, the horror genre is generally accepted. Perhaps not at the Academy Awards or whatever, but it's not looked down upon like for an actor as it once was to appear in a horror film. And that being said, it depends on what you think of as horror. Myself, I think the list is kind of endless. There's real life horror, paranormal, slasher, psychological. If there's something in it that scares the hell out of me, then I think it's horror. And should be celebrated as a good film, nothing more, nothing less. So, back to Mother's Boys, which again, I only clarify all that because I want a movie to be judged on what's good or what's bad about the movie and what it is, and not because of what we thought it was going to be. And there's a heck of a lot that I love about Mother's Boys. The first, last, beginning, middle, upside down thing that I love about Mother's Boys is Jamie Lee Curtis. Her performance as Jude Madigan is terrific. JLC has flown way over the cuckoo's nest in this film. I think lately she has more and more embraced her roles as a scream queen of the early 80s. I don't think it was something that she has shied away from. She has said this in interviews, but she did make a conscious effort to step away from horror, and she was never afraid or, she wasn't upset about the scream queen moniker. But, she doesn't personally like horror films anyway, so she never quite got why people loved her in these movies. I think with the resurgence, I think around Halloween H2O, and definitely with the new Halloween movie that came out in 2018, she's definitely understanding it now and embracing it. But what was great about Mother's Boys was that it was kind of in that middle time where she was an A-list celebrity, and her whole center wasn't really about these kinds of movies. And specifically, what's interesting about it is that she plays, she's definitely shying away from her good girl roles and is totally evil in this movie. So to see her appear in Mother's Boys at a time in the early 90s was certainly a treat. The only word to describe Jamie Lee Curtis as a villain is fabulous. She has bleach blonde hair, drives a convertible, she lives in a very uptown old money penthouse apartment, and what Jude wants, she usually gets. And what she wants is usually not out of purely wholesome motives. She does not like to lose anything that she perceives as belonging to her, even if she doesn't really want them anymore. And in this case, it is her family. Peter Gallagher is Robert Madigan, the handsome architect patriarch of the family. Their three sons are Kes, played by Luke Williams, Michael, who is played by Ben Ward, and the character Ben, played by Joey Zimmerman. Jude left the family before when Kes was young, but she returned. This time she has been gone for 3 years, and it was very bad for the family. Kes, in particular, took it hard, and he developed a lot of mental issues from his mother's abandonment. But now Robert has fallen in love with Colleen, who also happens to be the boys' principal, and they are just starting to put their lives back together. And that's just not going to work for Jude. She slowly manipulates her way back in. She professes that she just wants her traditional life now, and she will use every possible legal maneuver to make sure that things go her way. And at that time, for the mother, it was fairly automatic that her rights were strong and she could kind of get right back in despite what she did. And what she really wants is for Robert to just fall back into her arms, but she is more than willing to play hardball. Slowly but surely, she uses Kes's own mental instabilities to her advantage, basically proving time and time again what a terrible mother she really is. Mother's Boys opens with Kes in school, and he has to dissect a frog. The teacher lectures that this frog leaves her young at an early age to fend for itself, and this makes Kes snap, and he violently stabs the frog over and over and over again. And Jude's relationship with Kes becomes significantly inappropriate throughout the film, particularly in one bathtub incident. Every possible Oedipal flag is raised. However, in terms of what we have discovered from childhood abuse, this scene demonstrates that abuse is repeated generationally. It is implied later on that Jude's own childhood was robbed due to the inappropriate relationship of a parental unit. We learn this through Jude's mother, played by Vanessa Redgrave. Redgrave's character is very interesting. She has love for her daughter, but she is definitely on the side of Callie. She thinks that the children would be better off with a stepmother than their own birth mother. She believes that Jude is damaged beyond repair, which is totally sad but speaks volumes. Simoneau has created a well-crafted thriller, particularly with the character of Jude. We instinctively know that something is off about Jude. Of course, the marketing is very clear in this respect, the cover, the taglines, everything. That Jamie Lee's performance is all twists and turns. She is perfect in this sort of role. Yes, horror fans of course know her as the eternal scream queen, final girl. Laurie Strode was wholesomely good, but even when Terror Train Elena or Prom Night Kim had some swagger and sexiness, we still knew that they were the good girl. And of course, her mainstream career was almost always a good girl or woman some sort of role. It wasn't until Mother's Boys that we finally got to see Curtis take on the role of a villain. But what makes Curtis so great as Jude is that we can also very easily believe in her manipulations. Curtis has said that John Carpenter picked her for the role of Laurie because of her innate vulnerability, and that works for her well as Jude. We want to believe that her intentions are good, even if our brains tell her that her intentions are completely malevolent. She effortlessly delivers lots of doublespeak lines. In one scene, Callie says, "I don't want this to be a competition," and Jude says, "There is no competition." And Curtis is an expert at landing right in the middle of sincerity as well as underlying suggestion. She is innocently suggesting that she doesn't mean for there to be any fighting between the women, but she is also saying there is no competition because I would win. She is terrific too in saying all the right things. When she is not completely lying, she is very honest with the kids. She doesn't overreact to spilled milk in a way that a rational adult should, yet there is always something underneath. If she didn't have the completely selfish and malicious intent, she might actually be a good mother. And there is one scene in particular where she's at the planetarium with the kids where she gives this beautiful death glare stare at this woman who interrupts her, and it's always one of my favorite little moments that Jamie Lee Curtis delivers in it, because you don't usually see Jamie Lee Curtis give one of those looks. It's fabulous. Peter Gallagher is terrific as his role as the father. The chemistry between he and Jamie Lee Curtis very much is believable, and one would believe that they had a previous relationship. Robert is the object of Jude's goal, and the first half of the movie is a sort of dance between the two of them. Will he fall back under her spell, which has clearly been done many times before? But true to the setup of these types of specific psychological thrillers, the second half becomes a fight between the two main women. Which is why, as a feminist, I love the horror genre. Of course, I understand some early criticisms about the objectification of women in these movies, but I do think that many critics got it wrong. The horror genre is often the place where these strong female types actually come through and show these multifaceted characters that win, that fight, that stand up for themselves. No, I do not want to watch a horror movie where a woman is tortured for an hour and a half. But sign me up every time for a woman getting to fight for herself and stand up, and just as importantly, see a woman that is a human being, meaning she can be jealous and selfish and corrupt. Because good stereotypes are just as problematic as the bad stereotypes. These evil women psychological thrillers have some issues. With Fatal Attraction, there's the problematic line that the other woman is automatically bad and the wife is automatically good, and the man basically gets off scot-free. However, with Mother's Boys, these themes are played with in an interesting way. The wife is actually the bad one, and the other woman is the one we're supposed to root for. And I'm very much simplifying these. These characters have multiple facets and shadings, but just for the terms of this review, one's good, one's bad. and it becomes less and less that the man is what they are fighting for. Instead, it is the love of the children. Joanne Whalley plays Callie very sensibly and uses logic to determine her course of action. She wants to be there for these children, but she is more than willing to step away if she thinks that they want her to go. She and Cass start off amicably, but slowly Jude warps his mind against her. And in general, the titular boys mentioned all do a nice job. Luke Edwards has a similar quality to Edward Furlong in Terminator 2, that sort of tough, juvenile, but pretty vulnerable underneath. He tries to act like he is in control of his life, but he is very much a victim to all the adults around him. He holds his own with Curtis and is believably dangerous when it comes to Callie. He has a nuanced way of erupting in anger after having this quiet build-up. Colin Ward and Joey Zimmerman are perfectly fine as the two younger boys. They do not have the sort of arc roles that Luke Edwards has, but they play their roles well. Ward occasionally gets lost as the middle brother, but he has a few funny moments, and Zimmerman definitely has the cutesy factor that is needed for his role in this film, and even delivers one sleepy monologue particularly well. Again, Mother's Boys is not a film about the gore or the body count. Simoneau creates a suspenseful setting using the situations that these people are manipulated into by one sociopathic woman. The first third of the film is about introducing the characters and showing the sadness but survival of a family. Then it's like a cat and mouse scenario watching Jude manipulate everyone around to react the way she wants them to behave. And because the characters are all three-dimensional, we actually feel for them and are nervous that something bad will happen. The last third of Mother's Boys is an intense thriller that shows everything spiraling out of control, for everybody, Jude included. And a large part of the film is all about the inappropriateness of Jude, especially with Kes. I am always surprised by how few people have seen this film, especially considering one of the personal joys that I felt when watching Scream the first time was that the poster for Mother's Boys is featured prominently in the video store that Randy works in. And every time I show this movie to friends, there is at least always one guaranteed jump scare moment. And we all know that ecstatic feeling that you get when you show somebody a horror movie and you know that moment is coming, and it literally works every time. Mother's Boys definitely has one of those moments. I would never say that Mother's Boys is a classic horror film, at least not to anybody but me, but I do enjoy the psychological thrillers belonging to the horror genre. Plus, I love Jamie Lee Curtis's work, and I saw this right in the prime of that discovery. I first saw her in My Girl, and True Lies is one of my favorite action films of all time, and she was terrific in that as Helen Tasker. We all remember the incredible hanging scene from True Lies. The 90s was definitely a time where there was a hanging scene included in virtually every 90s movie and show, from The Good Son to Richie Rich, even on Baywatch. You know, where there is an overhead shot of somebody hanging from somebody else's hand. I don't know, I always thought those were pretty thrilling, and of course Mother Boys is no exception and certainly includes one of those moments. And then I was about 14 when I saw Halloween for the first time, and I think a big part of my enjoyment, I mean, of course I understand what a classic movie it is, but the reason why I got involved in it was because Jamie Lee Curtis was in it, and I had already seen her in all these other 90s movies at the time. So because I already enjoyed her, I definitely was going to give Halloween a chance, which of course I love. But to get to see her evil side in Mother's Boys is an absolute treat. And I think a lot of fans of Halloween, especially with her resurgence of popularity with the new Halloween movie, will enjoy seeing this side of Curtis. In addition to JLC's performance, this is definitely a must-watch for those that love those kinds of 90s thrillers such as Fatal Attraction and Hand That Rocks the Cradle. There was certainly at one time an audience for this type of film. They were mega blockbusters at the theater, particularly those two. And I believe that by the time Mother's Boys came about, these films had been overdone for audiences. Even on the DVD cover, one reviewer mentions that this is the Fatal Attraction for the 90s. But enough time has passed that I think, Mother's Boys can be judged on its own merit. I think people were sick of this type of film, and that's why it didn't do particularly well. But I think now, with the time gone by, people could watch it on its own right and make a decision about it based on what this film has to offer. At least for a first-time viewing. it's certainly a great choice for those that want to watch a horror movie with someone that isn't the biggest horror fan. I definitely have a sect of friends that do not like gory movies, but they love the psychological aspects of these kinds of films. Mother's Boys fits nicely alongside movies such as Single White Female, The Good Son, Deceived, and of course the other ones I mentioned. These get separated for no substantial reason away from the horror genre, but all the same motifs and themes and beats are all there. Well, thank you for watching another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Please comment here or on YouTube if you like psychological thrillers. Do you think they are basically horror, or do you like the genre separation? Please comment, like, or subscribe. I am your host, Justin Steele. You can find me over at Wicked Horror, or over on YouTube at 411 Pop Culture, or on Twitter at Wicked Horror Justin. Until our next episode, have a good one.